It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Another amazing conversation we're about to jump into here. So I got a chance to sit down with a clinician, but he's not just a clinician. He's also a career firefighter. As well, his organization is called First Responder Health Services. So his mission is really to squash the stigma, as we all are on this podcast. But he's looking at it in a different way, where he is connecting with clinicians due to his background being a professional, as well as a firefighter. So he's developed a program with several other leaders in this service to make sure that clinicians across British Columbia and other provinces understand the complexities of being a firefighter or a first responder, the culture, the language, the mindset, and just the unique aspects compared to other potential clients or patients that counselors or therapists may be seeing. We're going to dive into a directory that he's developed that allows people to find a clinician that's close to them and who is well-versed in the fire service terminology. He's also a big part of the Firefighter Occupational Awareness Training Program that's online. And last I heard, it was over 6,000 firefighters have registered for this amazing 12-module online program. So today I got to sit down with Matt Johnston. Matt and I have been going back and forth and finally got a chance to sit down and have a great conversation. You're not going to want to miss this episode. You're going to want a pen and paper in hand and take some notes, because he has lots and lots of knowledge to share with us. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and until next time, stay well. All right, welcome back, everyone. I have another special guest on the air. We've been trying to get this fellow on the air for some time now. He's a bit of a hot commodity for his knowledge and his skills and who he is as a person. So I'm very happy to have him on the show today. Today we've got Matt Johnston, career firefighter and a mental health advocate. So welcome to the show, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Arjuna.
Fantastic. So tell our audience a little bit about who Matthew Johnston is.
Oh, geez. So former full-time distance runner, ran for Team Canada, stayed in university so that I could balance my athletic pursuits with academics, and ended up getting a master's in psychology and then opening up my own practice in 2006. And then, I missed the team-based atmosphere of my profession as a runner, and a lot of my former teammates went into the profession of firefighting, and that's where I found myself full-time in 2012. And it's been an interesting career change, and it's also been an interesting blending of my two careers the last decade or so.
Did you actually manage to do both careers at the same time, or did you leave your practice to go to firefighting?
Yeah, my practice was pretty busy. I worked a lot with children and adolescents. I'm primarily around, abuse, neglect, depression, anxiety. So I had quite an extensive inner city outreach program that involved animal-assisted therapy. And a lot of the work I did was funded by charitables such as the CKNW Kids Fund, which used to be called the CKNW Orphans Fund. So it's been nice that I was able to do that for the first stages of my career in the fire service. And then, unfortunately, some untimely events within fire service where we lost a cluster of members to suicide kind of side railed me from my practice in counseling psychology and went more into an education role with healthcare providers on how to provide more culturally competent services for first responders.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be a part of our conversation today, because I think that's such a key aspect. That's that understanding of the occupational therapist to understand the life, the culture, the terminology of the fire service. You've been a big player in that. And I think that is such a critical kind of shift in our in our mental health journey through the fire service, right? So I
Yeah.
commend you for that for sure. That's a huge thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been, something that I saw a need very early on. I think, firefighters don't really access upstream services. We're very good at ignoring stress related symptoms until we're in a crisis or a breaking point. And then we have this assumption that outside civilian experts can fix us. And there's a lot of myths that I've been working on to dispel on both sides of that equation to really promote the value of upstream care and recognizing early warning signs around psychological injury. So it's been quite a journey. It's been 7 years and counting since we started providing healthcare provider training. But I'm pleased to say that there's quite a bit of momentum across Canada now in this arena, and um, I feel like it's come full circle for me with my two careers and given me a lot of meaning in terms of why back in 2011 I decided to pursue a career in firefighting. And now I look back over a decade later and realize that it had a lot of meaning and purpose.
When you say that, it kind of reminds me of my journey as well, because I always thought that the fire service was my end calling. That was what I was meant to do. But only recently I kind of realized that, hey, maybe what I'm doing now is actually what I'm meant to do. And the journey before that was just a stepping stone. I was
Yeah,
like, ah,
absolutely. And
that was
that's the
very kind of,
beauty.
yeah, it was
That's
eye
the
opening.
beauty of our era is, there's so many talented people that have multidisciplinary skills that really, when we choose to apply them in other arenas, I think it can really benefit both industries in terms of what skill sets we bring as first responders and vice versa.
100%. So this wasn't necessarily on our discussion topic, but I know you're very well versed in this, and I'd love to just hear your thoughts on it, because I'm a very passionate person about somatic work for the
Mhm.
trauma aware and release and everything like that. And I know you did an interview with Peter Levine,
Mm.
maybe last year or something like that, 2022, 2021, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear just a couple nuggets that you got out of that interview that you kind of are taking away to use in your own practice with mental health and firefighting.
Yeah. Well, it was an honor to meet Peter Levine and, not in person, but online, and
Mhm.
work with his staff to, talk about the impact that particularly distressing events have on the nervous system. And obviously, his work spans 5, probably close to 6 decades now. True pioneer, and obviously a multiple New York Times bestselling author. Yeah, Peter, in my reflection on that time with him, brought a lot of wisdom to the conversation. I think that what I learned respectfully is that there is a big gap between the somatic experiencing techniques that he has really developed a passion and an expertise in, and the implementation on the front line. There needs to be a strong translation piece there. I think that first responders indirectly do a really good job of somatic based training, in the sense that they're physically active, they're connected to nature. And a lot of the things that, whether it's, you know, Shapiro with EMDR and how she founded that as going for a walk in a park in Chicago, I believe, or just the, physical shedding of events like Peter has provided, I think really, to me, gave me a lot of hope that even though first responders may not be labeling it somatic experiencing or EMDR, they are doing some forms of active meditation routines without necessarily looking at it from the lens that you or I or Peter would. And so my time with Peter really gave me a lot of hope that in some ways we're quite far from building programs that fall under somatic experiencing, but celebrating what first responders may be doing, even in their practices of getting out in the nature and hunting for 3 or 4 days, um, are some of the same goals that somatic experiencing would have for their clients. So, you know, firefighters want to learn the tools to fix themselves. And so I'm really guided by exploring those tools and finding out ways to translate that to first responder audience. And I think that's my takeaway when I think back to Peter is he really gave me, a fertile soil to start thinking outside of the box on how we can apply some of these techniques and, the counseling psychology field into the first responder profession.
Love it. Yeah, like you said, I'm definitely I'm a TRE provider, so tension trauma release exercise provider. So my work with Dr. David Berselli and Peter Levine has really opened my eyes up there. There's so many different avenues to heal ourselves, right? And that's what I love about TRE. It's a self care tool.
Hmm.
Um, but I never really thought about hunting or fishing. Well, fishing I've done personally, so I can relate to that. But yeah, being outside in the outdoors, people probably firefighters don't actually realize that what they're doing to their mental health, being outside, forest bathing, whatever you want to call it. You can throw all these fancy words on it,
Hmm.
but just being out in nature is what they're doing, right? So yeah, that's a
Well, and even just restoration activities like repairing cars and taking
yeah.
pride in doing something, you can't be anxious and relaxed at the same time. And I think that inherently all adults, but since we're talking particularly about firefighters, is a lot of us do a really good job in active stress recovery techniques that may be camouflaged by the idea that it's a routine that they do with friends or it's a passion around, hunting. But in reality, really, it's about, and in my opinion, a form of active meditation that resets the stress response. And I think there's some inherent wisdom within a lot of first responders about finding things that they absolutely need, and building it into a routine that, again, ironically, and I see this every day in the fire hall, um, are some of the goals that clinicians would have for their clients. And so that's kind of the translation that I'm looking at. There's a lot of myths on both sides of the culture, whether it's the counseling psychology profession or the first responder profession, about what my goals and objectives are in terms of closing this gap between, healthcare provider and first responder.
I love it. I love it. I'd love to hear your perspective on stoicism in the fire service. Um,
Sure.
I think there's some goods, there's some bads. I think there's some misconceptions, maybe some rumors about what stoicism should be. I'd love to hear
Mhm.
what your view is on that and how it impacts the fire service.
Yeah, well, I define stoicism as the endurance of pain or hardship without complaint. And that's probably very similar to what you'd see on a Wikipedia definition. And the modern portrayal of Stoicism is very different from, the ancient philosophers around Stoicism, which really was about leading a good life. And the modern portrayal and how we have, translated Stoicism in the fire service and many professions in first responders in general is this idea that we function over feeling. Famous Bruce Ramsey line, a local CISM instructor here in Vancouver.
Mm.
And what does that mean? Well, that means ignoring your stress response to engage at all costs. And if we're going to rope in kind of the neurobiology of this and talking about somatic experiencing, is that when we ignore our inherent hardwired stress response, there's consequences to it. And so what stoicism does in the modern portrayal is it's really good at dampening the least desirable emotions around pain, weakness, sadness, which is really what we flight from as first responders. But as we know, it also dampens down the feelings of connection and joy and a sense of belonging, which are all hardwired human qualities. And so, what happens with modern day stoicism for many of us, and it is perpetrated and entrenched in our culture, is it kind of creates a flat line in a paramilitary setting that inevitably, if unless you are acutely self aware and engage in self care measures, especially around the transition from the hall to the all or the home place, can really blend and bleed into other areas of our lives where we feel quite disconnected from our loved ones. And so to me, stoicism is something that is an adaptable response to engage in, incredibly potentially distressing events. It allows us to get the job done at all costs. But it also means that we're overriding 280 million years of our evolutionary hardwired past to get through an unpredictable but regular high level of exposure to particularly distressing events, which means inevitably, if we're going to spend more than a decade in this career, it is going to affect our nervous system at a very deep level. And that's where active self-care strategies are absolutely necessary if we want to leave this profession healthy. And right now, we're not. The data is showing that. And not only are we not leaving the profession healthy, we're not even getting to the finish line for many of us when we look at, the psychological injury rates that we're currently faced with.
But for people who kind of see aspects of stoicism that they really are drawn to, how can they process that sadness, or how can they feel
Mhm.
that joy at some point? Maybe not in the moment of an MBI, maybe not in the moment of whatever they're doing in the fire scene. When can they, or how can they process that, and when should they process it?
Very good question. Well, I mean, when we're talking about a particularly distressing event that might lead to diffusing or debriefing through the, traditional SISM model, I think that's when we really see the silver lining in um, our human worth and our ability to endure some complex emotions. There's quite a diversity in personality and political beliefs and age range and all that within fire service. And one of the beauties that we have is that, and I would say an undervalued beauty is when we go to a particularly distressing event that requires either a formal or informal conversation about it. That experience brings us back to being innately human, and it supersedes our political differences and our age differences, and we get to see each other for who we truly are. And that's been, to me, the greatest gift that the fire service has provided me, is that people that I may have really disliked and then had experienced a hardship with, just the power that experience has to bond one another. And so that would be in response to a particularly distressing event. But when it comes to like the daily grind of life and work and how we balance that, really what I've come to the conclusion of is that transition back from the hall into your home life, where there has to be some greater self-awareness, reflection, and intention behind how we re-enter our personal lives when we leave work. And the reason why I feel this way is because I was a trauma clinician through the Worker Compensation Board of BC. I worked with one client, and what I recognized is a lot of similarities between how he coped with life and how I was coping with life. And the way that he would describe some of his interactions as a civilian outside a uniform was inherently built around some cynicism and naivety around how people see the world. They don't get me because I'm a firefighter, and they don't realize what just happened in that intersection that I drove through 10 hours later after I went to that MPA. And so when I started seeing the lived experience of, I think a highly treatable, and it proved to be a highly treatable challenge, um, I started to realize that when, especially in smaller communities where you live close or within your city that you provide service, there has to be some rituals around recognizing what your body is doing and what your mind's saying to you as you drive home and enter your home life. So what I've realized is that if you can leave work recognizing what your hands are doing on your steering wheel, recognizing what kind of emotions you have as you're tied up in rush hour on the way, recognizing what parks you pass by, or what recreational facilities you pass by, particularly after a night shift, where, the aquatic center is, freshly cleaned and very quiet at 7:30 in the morning. And that opportunity to jump into a hot tub or a sauna and decompress from a long night shift is something that I personally gotten into the routine of, and it's fundamentally changed how I transition back into my personal life after a long shift. So I've really used myself as kind of a human introspective guinea pig when it's come to distressing calls, routines, and figuring out what works and what doesn't, particularly because I would say I'm a highly stoic individual. My running was all about enduring pain and hardship. And while it wasn't, a physical contact sport, I'd often have to pull toenails off of my toes after races indoors, and sometimes I could see blood through my spikes because I'd run right through my blisters. And so those are the qualities that we celebrate as firefighters, are those individuals in society that function over feeling, but it also leaves them really susceptible to ignoring self-care strategies. And that's really not celebrated in the current lexicon of fire culture. Right now, what we still see is that, reaching out for help is a sign of weakness, or, if I'm, a mental health professional, which I am, it's often associated with a sense of softness or, inability to tolerate stress, which is very far from the truth in terms of what mission I'm on.
Hmm, fascinating. Yeah, you had so many nuggets in there, and I think the transition back to home is such a critical one. I had one that I didn't even know it was a transition, but my wife kind of started it for me, and then looking back on it when I wrote my book, I was like, oh, that actually was a transition that we were doing, and it worked very well in my early years. So yeah, I think that's such a critical component.
Yeah, and thank goodness, you had a wife waiting for you at home. I think one of the
Exactly.
challenges we face, especially when it comes to risks around suicide, is a poor or a thwarted sense of belonging, and also, not having a lot of support in our personal lives. And when we feel like we're a burden to others, our self care tends to decrease, and our self awareness as well. And if we don't have someone in our home life helping us monitor these symptoms, because home place is ground zero for this, we can go down a slippery slope pretty quick.
So we keep talking about smashing the stigma, getting rid of the stigma. What's Matt's thoughts on how this is actually going to end the stigma?
Hmm.
Is there an end?
While our data is showing that it's not, um, I work with a lot of groups within our province, and BC is home to what I would consider the most progressive mental health rollout
Definitely.
provincially of any province in Canada. But the data that we've done earlier this year on self stigma is that, 90% of firefighters, and that includes administrators and fire support staff, would rather deal with their setbacks without the assistance of a healthcare provider.
Wow.
And
90%.
80%, yeah,
Wow.
89%, yeah.
Wow.
And that's a
That's
sample of 1,099 fire service personnel in BC. So that represents almost 10% of all fire service members, which is a huge sample.
mhm,
You look at some of these national like landmark studies on firefighter mental health, they have like 700 participants in their study. So the fact that we had over 1,000 for BC, it leads us to be very confident in understanding what the current landscape is. We also see a direct correlation with years of service and skepticism towards healthcare providers. And so, if we want to look at it from a senior fire or administrative level, the most stoic individuals on our job are the ones that are leading our organizations. They're the ones that are saying in our data that they are the most skeptical of outsiders and will not seek care even if they experience a setback in life.
hmm,
And, we see that in the psychological injury rates the last 7 years in BC, where there's been a 2,000% increase since 2015, um, to the point where it's going to cost BC municipalities like $40 million just on psychological injury through WorkSafe BC. And that's not including the cost to the employer, which is like backfilling, time loss, that kind of stuff, which I'm sure you're familiar with given your time as a fire chief. And so really what we're starting to look at in terms of our injury prevention work is that cost is actually close to 3-to-1 ratio. So if the average firefighter psychological injury costs 240,000, which is what the data is saying, they're saying it could actually be up to 3 times that when it includes costs to the employer and lost productivity to society. I mean, we get into some complex variables, but it's actually a lot more than just what worker compensation boards are reporting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you seen any trends in the new generation coming in, the brand new recruits that are coming in?
I think what we'll see is we'll see a different type of psychological injury emerge from the new generation. I find myself mid 40s, so I'm recognizing that I'm having more in common with captains than I do with new people, and that's inevitable. You end up feeling old fairly quickly in this profession. I'm sure you can attest to that, and so what I think we see is a much more cerebral type of candidate now, someone that is, quite emotionally intelligent, someone that I think may not embrace paramilitary culture the way that my generation has. And so I think we're going to see a transition more and more out of like a paramilitary mindset. And I think, if we look at emerging trends around that age group, and I'm talking like, 30 and under, that, depression and anxiety and loneliness are the things that are driving that generation that's coming up. And also what we've seen is a deterioration of the brother and sisterhood of fire culture in terms of it being a calling and a major part of one's identity. With the advent of 24-hour shifts, people are moving farther out. We're not as connected as we used to be as a fire culture. And in some ways, I see that as a good thing because it might mean that you spend more time with your civilian peer networks. In other ways, I think, it can be quite isolating too with our shift patterns because when our civilian friends are off, we might be working. So it could be a double whammy, right? Where we're not aligning with our fire culture peers as much as we do. Our interactions are on WhatsApp rather than on the phone or in person. And so people are feeling inherently more isolated than previous generations. And I think when you stack that on to potentially distressing calls and sleep debt, that could really lead to some other type of risk factors that are going to be burgeoning and unique to that generation that, is going to be different than the type of injuries that we see psychologically with, our age group, 40 plus.
Hmm. When you hang your helmet for the last time, do you see yourself going back into this field of mental health and keeping that momentum going? Or any thoughts there about
Yeah, that's a
your
good
future?
question. Well, I've maintained active membership status with my counseling association the whole way through. And I'm very proud of that, membership because it took me 10 years of university to get it.
Mm.
And so even though I'm not practicing, I still keep it. And I really think, and I've talked to my colleague Duncan Shields extensively about this, that, as we get older, the stories have a different type of impact on us. And I would suspect that I'll continue to do the education part of healthcare providers, but I would probably, if I was to say it now as a 45-year-old man, I would probably see myself, if I'm going to go back in the counseling profession, to do something completely unique and different. I might go back to, animal assisted therapy and working with children and youth. But I could see myself doing that mainly in a philanthropic capacity rather than trying to create a business out of it again.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Sometimes a fresh start is, well, not a fresh start, but a new perspective on life, right?
Yeah.
20, 25, 30 years in the fire service, it's healthy to have another encore career, uh, doing something that brings you joy, right? So,
Yeah. And I mean, I look back on the last 25 years. I mean, I was a full-time student until I was 26, some overlap with running on the national team through that. And then, a full-time mental health professional. So in some ways, I'm on my fourth career in the fire service, which is, when you talk about trying something new, I feel like that is what's allowed me to maybe take a bit of an introspective 35,000-foot view of what's happening. That's really what my brain thrives on is kind of problem solving. A lot of firefighters' brains thrive on problem solving, physical issues like alarm panel resets and, sprinkler flows. I wish I was better at being able to do that. I hope I can continue to acquire those skills.
yeah,
But I look at more of the interpersonal, social, emotional side of the profession. And, when I look at my experience with dealing with suicide and the research done in this area as well, and the need for, upstream early prevention care, I think that that has a different type of value to the fire service as well. And, I think that, that's where everyone in the fire service brings something unique and something helpful to the profession.
100%. Yeah, the diversity of the fire service is what makes it so great, right?
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
been a wonderful learning experience for me, and different, not only the training, but also the skill sets and personalities. It's been really cool.
And one of the best test kitchens you could possibly imagine, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's for sure. My culinary skills, I would say they peaked at about 5 years into the job and has been on a steady decline since. But people in my personal life are so impressed with my cooking, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that. But it's because the bar is set high by these young guys coming up
Exactly.
that do all sorts of fancy things in the kitchen.
Exactly. Yep. So, what can today's leadership, and this is not a knock on today's leadership, but what can today's leadership maybe do a little bit better? Where could we see some improvement there?
Yeah, I mean, there's opportunity for a lot of improvement. And I think Dr. Don McCurry's research has pointed that out in that organizational stressors are quickly becoming more significant contributing factors to psychological injury than attending potentially traumatic events. And in my working, I do a lot of teaching with firefighters, and I'll often ask them, if I gave you two options, what would you take? You can either go to a call of a traumatic nature that keeps you up for a couple of days, or you could make a mistake at work where you're judged and ridiculed and maybe even investigated by the employer for conduct. Which one would you take? And of course, the firefighters will unanimously say they'd rather go to a traumatic experience than making a mistake at work. So we know how hard we are on ourselves, and there's nothing that management or any employer could do to make us feel worse about the mistakes we make. And so I really think that there's a need for more compassion based leadership. I know there's a movement with the term trauma informed leadership. As you've noticed, I haven't really said the word trauma in our interview over 35 minutes here now. And that's because I think that's where the stigma lies when we're talking
Mm,
about smashing stigma.
mm,
Primarily because if you look at a Wikipedia definition of trauma, it's usually surrounding a damage to one's mind, exceeding one's ability to cope. In other words, it makes it sound like the event itself is so much more powerful than anything you can deal with. And so when I look at leadership styles, I think that the soft skills are important. I think that leading, with your heart, and maybe dotting your I's and crossing your T's secondary is important. And I think there needs to be a restoration of fire chief, not fire administrator. I think that that is one of the major underlying challenges that I've seen in my travels nationally is we need more advocates for the fire service. And it goes both ways. Like we need labor leaders that are more understanding of their privilege of being in the center and knowing that not everyone you represent feels that they're in the center. And what can you do to build greater empathy and understanding with those individuals? So I'm not just speaking about, fire administrators. I'm speaking about union labor leaders and fire administrators, all leaders in the fire service, including fire officers. And really what we see in leadership training, particularly out of, Lionel Crothers there in Winnipeg, the innovative leadership training really focuses on training new recruits to be leaders. So this supersedes rank and seniority as well. So there's, in my opinion, a lot of work to be done because it really impacts every rank. And really what my work is centered on is training those HR, individuals in the unique nuances of fire culture and how you can't implement a lot of the same types of policies that you can do with other departments within your municipality because it's a very different culture, as you know.
Mhm.
And so when we try and superimpose a civilian style of protocols on a very prideful, like we talked about, stoic paramilitary audience, there becomes significant gaps in how policy is interpreted and hits the road. So I've seen this, I've seen it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to employers when they make the wrong move with how they investigate or proceed with a very delicate matter regarding an individual's mental health. And I've also seen labor leaders that have had a hard time keeping things confidential, that have absolutely had adverse impacts on people's reputation on the job. So it's, in my opinion, there's a call to action there, a challenge that luckily the BC PFFA is really wanting to explore in terms of leadership training in this area. And I think if we do that, I think that that will be permission giving to the vulnerable members to come forward. And by vulnerable, these are going to be members that we would never guess are struggling with mental health issues, and encouraging early access to care. Uh, it's an absolutely no brainer from a moral standpoint, a human impact standpoint, and unfortunately, what the biggest priority is, obviously, is the financial side of it. I think that that is really the missing piece that will reduce psychological injuries in decades to come.
From your experience, is there anyone in the world who is doing a really top-notch job besides BC that we could look at?
Um, Very fragmented.
Mm.
I think of Rob Martin. Trauma informed leadership is something that Rob Martin has been championing for a
Yeah,
few
okay.
years. And, I don't think it's all that complex. I think that what really hangs employers up, and I totally get it, is there's protocols in place for a reason. I just think that if we can lead with the human side of it a bit more, uh, I think we can mitigate a lot of these, challenges that really take someone that's, right on the red line and pushes them over the threshold of potentially never returning to work. Um, and, the taxpayer loses ultimately when it comes to the money side of it. And there's a human toll that's, a stripping of someone's identity that they've had a lot of pride in. So, to me, like compassion based leadership is essentially about ruling out any medical related issues that might be contributing to that individual's conduct. And if we look at, where many of us come from, we come from contact sports in our background. And so what is the impact of sleep debt and, 5,000 calls or, by the time you're 25 years on, 15,000 calls? How does that impact you when, you might have a history of concussions and, early signs of CTE? It leaves us very vulnerable to psychological injuries that are grossly misunderstood by the civilian healthcare community. So I understand that this is a unique challenge, but it's something that is, in my travels around Canada talking to firefighters, I just realized how normal the struggles are. No matter what city, you tend to pluck a random group of 3 firefighters out and put them, like I do, on a panel wherever I teach, and share their story. And the themes are very similar. What I find fascinating as a 5'9" distance runner is that, the archetypal firefighter that's 6'4", and, dad and brother and uncle were fire service members. Some of them have stated just the impact that service has had on their mental health. And it really continues to blow me away because, this is a profession I got into in my early 30s without any connection to the fire service other than friends. And so when I hear of people that I really, think would have no problem in fire culture and their true experience, I realize how normal the struggle is for many of us on the front line.
And that's maybe what the secret is to squashing the stigma, is making it normal and making everyone just know that that's just part of life, part of the job, right? It's normal. We're all in the same boat.
Well, and that's what we're doing here in BC. Like I'm proud to say we launched the Firefighter Occupational Awareness Training Course series. And it starts with collaboration at the top, as you know, and the BC Municipal Safety Association brought together the Fire Chiefs Association, the BC PFFA, the training officers, the Volunteer Association as well. And basically, we're like, okay, we're going to create a standardized psychological tools program for firefighters. And what our data was showing is that all firefighters more or less wanted more psychological tool training. And so we did a 12 module series, put it on education platform. And, 6 months into it, we have over 6,000 enrollments in the program, which,
Incredible.
the BCPFFA, I just read a little letter there that not a little letter, a significant letter, saying that this program is, the most popular program in the history of being able to launch a mental health training program.
Wow.
So this goes beyond our time today, but one of the challenges and missions I'm on is we live in a province and a country where mental health is unregulated. And so it's the wild, wild west in terms of who is recognized as a mental health professional and who's competent in providing care to first responders. And so, my belief was if the province isn't going to do a better job of regulating and standardizing language around psychological stress injuries, let's do it ourselves. And that's really what occupational awareness training is all about, is built, for firefighters by firefighters. And now what we see is many other first responder groups in and beyond BC are wanting to do a similar style of training for their professions as well, which I have tremendous hope in leading to a better, chapter in the fire service when I leave it.
Fantastic. Yeah,
Mhm.
when I saw that 6,000 enrollments in 3 months, I was like, wow, that's unheard of. So that's very impressive.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And, the BC, it's just nice because I participate in these committee meetings with labor leaders and also, administrative leaders. And I think we're done with the era of an us versus them mentality. Like
Good.
we're in this together.
Thank
Like,
God.
yeah, if we want to talk about stigma, fire administrators have the largest stigma in our data sample
Mm.
of not reaching out for care. So the ultimate irony is we talk about attending distressing events as potentially leading to a sense of stoicism. But what we're also seeing is fire administrators who are the most resistant to care. And let's face it, might have the largest backpack in the city because of their combination of frontline experience and now the safety of an entire department under their hands and balancing tough cuts with budgetary issues and stuff like that. That's a colossal challenge on our mental health and well-being. So I have sympathy and compassion for both sides. There's absolutely no question about it.
Beautiful. So another big part of your website, occupational awareness training for professionals, there's also a directory in there that I think is
Mhm.
very important to maybe share with everyone today. That directory was formed how?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in 2017, we started kind of a road trip, traveling around BC initially, and then Alberta and Saskatchewan, most recently New Brunswick. And what we would do is we'd host 2 days of training in an active fire hall setting. And of course, this was really appealing to mental health professionals who, to their credit, have never been given exposure to a paramilitary environment. And so I developed a lot of empathy for them as well, because I kept hearing horror stories from my colleagues about when they reached out for care, what their level of care they received actually was. And so originally, admittedly, I had a, you know, be in my bonnet or whatever you want to say about like setting the record straight with healthcare providers. And I didn't have to do that because they flocked to the training. And I realized there were really salt of the earth people that simply just didn't have exposure on how to provide care to this audience. So what ended up happening is I'd go to Cranbrook or I'd go to Kelowna or Nanaimo or Oak Bay, do the training, and we'd be left with this great group of clinicians. And then my phone would start blowing up about, hey, do you know a clinician in so and so? Um, so that's when I approached my friend in the tech industry and asked him if he would like to build a directory. And so that was the start of, I had a vision, just like, when you go on Airbnb or VRBO and it's like that pin drop map. I wanted the same thing for healthcare providers. Now, what's behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know is that the healthcare providers that appear on this directory, they have to sign, like, I think it's a 4-page agreement on how to provide care for our clients. By clients, I mean any first responder that contacts them through First Responder Health. And what that means is that they have to streamline care. If you have a busy caseload, totally get it. If you're good at what you do, you're going to be in demand. So you got to refer on if you can't, within 5 business days, take on a first responder client, and that includes their family. Um, and so it's about a hard handoff if you can't do it yourself. And then also recognizing that, the 54 municipalities in BC that the BCPFA represents, there's 54 different extended health plans, right? So it's about educating your clients early on about if your sessions are covered or not, and kind of helping dispel some of the common areas of resistance that first responders have when they reach out for care. Um, and then the challenge I put on the first responders is, don't wait for crisis. Like, this isn't a crisis service. And this is like looking for a new car. Like, there's different makes and models for different personality types. So I tend to walk a fine line on both sides of trying to really bridge the disconnect between the two groups, and really get back to the how do you provide care for human beings. So I'm proud to say, like, this directory that we do, it's 100% in kind. There's like no paywall, no data mining. There's no login. It's completely anonymous. All we find out at the end of the year is how many times, the directory has been accessed.
Nice.
And, I think we had 6,000 visits in the first 3 months of this year.
Mm.
So I'm pretty happy with the momentum that we've, been able to create. And, that is the way that I've really felt like I've made meaning out of the losses in the fire service, is that, we'll save more lives than we lost, without me minimizing anyone's death. That's really what motivated me initially to close this gap. And, I'm proud to say that we've made strides to closing that gap significantly.
Oh, 100%.
Excuse me.
I got some podcast guests that are down the States and they've requested the link to this directory because I've mentioned it several times in different shows. And so, Florida's now seen it,
Mhm.
Carolina's now seen it. So yeah, it's passing around the world. So
Oh, that's cool. It's interesting because where my thoughts have been the last week is, on an organizational level. because we still have organizations that are resistant towards some of the implementation of psychological tools, which I believe is correlated with psychological healthy, safe workplaces. So in workplaces that are resistant towards, implementing upstream mental health care, my gut tells me that those are going to be the organizations that are struggling with the highest rates of psychological injury. And so what I really would put a challenge out to the listeners of this podcast is, just because you may not, you know, be a qualified mental health professional or even on the CISM or peer support team, it doesn't stop you from really advocating for upstream services within your fire department. And we have great diversity in terms of, fire departments, even within the Lower Mainland, let alone provincially. And every one of those cultures is very different, and they have their strengths and then they have their challenges. And I think we're in an era where, the WorkSafe First Responder Steering Committee, the BC PFFA, and I can say from my direct experience with the Fire Chiefs Association the last 6 months, where all of those associations are unanimously saying, like, stamping out shame and stigma is what we need to do. And I think it's going to take a mobilization of like-minded firefighters to really say status quo isn't good enough anymore. We've lost too many members, not only to suicide, but also to psychological injury where they never come back to work. And while some of those individuals were very hard to deal with, I think the beauty of this culture, the brother sisterhood, is that we don't forget that. We don't forget the human toll. Like, nothing on this job is more important than someone's health and well-being. And so I would challenge your viewers to really think about what they can do differently. And if they feel a little bit sheepish to, go to their union meetings or get involved on a formal level with CISM or peer support, what can they do on their crew level, just to be kinder, better human beings to their colleagues? Because I think that will be like a stone cast in a water that will create a ripple effect within culture. And, I don't sit on a pedestal here saying that I know better. But what I've really worked on, this year on my crew is being more positive. That's something I've really struggled with because I'm a critical thinker. I'm looking at things from sometimes a mental health professional lens. And of course I can go down a rabbit hole like that. But, you know, um, embracing an abundance mentality that everyone can win, I think is the natural evolution of not thinking this is an us versus them issue. That's just way too overly simplified. And I think, right from the number one to the new recruit, like, we all have a backpack. Um, and
Right.
and there's a good chance that the backpacks are quite a bit bigger just on age alone, age related issues in the fire service. And so, compassion led interactions in the fire service is going to go incredibly long way, and it should never be equated with a sense of weakness. The best people I've ever worked with are the people that I've learned to become a better listener because I've tried to emulate them. And, it's an act of courage to really peel back the layer and going, well, no, how are you doing? Like, I know you're going to say good. Like, seriously, what's going on in your life, man? Like, we got 23 hours to go together here, and 11 months. Like, let's be honest with each other so that, we can take that home place as ground zero for mental health issues and bring it into the fire hall, and let's collectively share that, because that 2 in 2 out rule that we have for entering into fires, also applied to the things we witness on scene. And so why not apply it to the sharing of experiences within our fire culture? And especially if you're resistant towards talking to a therapist, that can be some of the best therapy that you can have, is just sharing your story and having an active listener within your fire service, because you're going to be spending more contact hours with them than you will any mental health professional. And, fortunately or unfortunately, any person in your personal life as well. So our colleagues are the ones that are going to buffer. It's the bonds that we have with each other that are going to buffer life stressors, traumatic experiences, organizational stressors. And that's the challenge I put to all layers of union and management, is like, let's just, share our experiences with each other to show the human side of this. And we're blessed with a great profession. Like, let's get the most out of it so that when we leave it, it's better than where we found it. But also it's something where we're looking forward to enjoying retirement without despair.
Yes. Well, that's the key, right? I think there's a whole nother episode there about retirement of, it shouldn't be looked at as a void in your life. It should be looked at as something you're looking forward to. And my kind of thing is healthy hire, healthy retire. That's kind of
Love it.
that's my goal, right? Is to encourage people to have a healthy hire and retire healthy.
Yeah.
And what blows me away is, and a beautiful conversation with you, is how many times you brought up the word human.
Yeah.
Human, I think, is something that I say that all the time now. It's just something in me that I want to humanize the fire service. That's kind of my passion. I want to humanize business. I want to humanize leadership. And the amount of times you said human just really got me going. That was like, yeah,
Nice.
that's the right attitude towards life for sure. Because we are all humans. We're not firefighters first. We're humans first. So
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I look forward to, the next 10 to 15 years of my career. And, I'm very hopeful for the future. I really like the people that we're hiring. I have a 14-year-old son. So, whether he goes into fire or not doesn't,
mm,
not the way I look at it. But what I find really fascinating is that some of these young new hires are young enough to be my son, and so, or daughter. And it's such an intriguing experience, getting older in the fire service, because these are types of life lessons that you would never have been able to figure out without living in it. And to feel a sense of connection to, in my case, 400 firefighters, all going through a profession. 99% of us end up going through it for, several decades. It's amazing watching people go through age-related issues, just like ourselves, right? So
totally. Totally.
there's a lot of things to celebrate within fire culture.
Beautiful. Great way to end it. Matthew, how can people get more information about you, and how can they find out about your program and any way to connect with you?
Yeah. So, they can send me an email at matt@firstresponderhealth.ca. The website is www.firstresponderhealth.org. And there's quite a few, we've morphed into an education platform company. So we provide training for frontline first responder groups, and we also provide training for healthcare providers. So again, it's a two-tiered approach towards, closing the gap between first responders and healthcare providers. As you mentioned, it's not just Canada, but it's a topic within North America. So this is the interesting thing about our profession, right? Is just how similar the fire culture personalities are, no matter what state or province you're in. So a lot of the content that we develop is applicable to different states and provinces. So no matter where your viewers are listening from, this is, I think, a topic that if you look at it through the lens of first responder or public safety, this is a relevant conversation in any fire department, and really any first responder group out there.
Fantastic. Well, Matt, I could probably have a conversation for another 2-3 hours with you for sure. So I'd love to have you back on the show for 100%.
Yeah, anytime. I'd love
Yeah.
to I'd love to delve into more of the neurobiology stuff
Oh,
with you, since that's of interest, right? And
big time.
that's a huge passion of mine too. And I think when I reflect back on what students get out of my work, it's talking about the stress response in a way that is very unique to the fire culture. And that might be something that you want to delve into sometime on another podcast.
Love to.
Okay.
Well, Matthew, thank you very much. It's been an honor to chat with you, and I really feel privileged to sit down and have an hour of your time. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to staying connected and keep up all your great work too. I see burnt around the edges, and
Yeah.
I look forward to getting back into some reading someday. Too busy developing programs, but
You're doing good
I've
work.
heard from Steve and others that your book's on point. So
Yeah.
keep up the great work and the advocacy.
I appreciate it. Same to you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time, stay well.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.